Hi, today's episode is going to be about conceptual models. And conceptual models are actually very simple. They're in a way simplifications of the real world, but it helps you to understand the real world, to think about the real world in a structured way. You do that by, in the first instance, reading about the topic, seeing what other people have done in the way of research about this, how they view this, and then to build a small model that is closely linked to your problem statement and your research questions. In a model, you have some elements which we will call variables. Variables are simply attributes of cases that can take on different values. Between variables, there are potentially relationships. And these relationships are usually the point of your research questions. You will ask some questions about these relationships. I hope you enjoy the video. Should you like it and should you find it useful, please subscribe to this channel so you can find out when new videos come out. And should you have any questions about the research you're doing, feel free to send me an email and I'll do my best to collect these, and when there is a bit of a trend going, I'll try and create other episodes that deal with what I would call frequently asked questions. Quite apart from that, I'll be dealing with things that, from my perspective, I've seen in students who conduct research and the assistance they might need. And that covers something like 40 years now in both the natural and social sciences. Hope you enjoy the video.
What is a conceptual model? It is a diagram of proposed causal linkages among a set of concepts believed to be related to a problem. This implies that the conceptual model should be related to your problem statement. The link with your set of research questions is that they relate to the relationship between certain variables in your model. If you are constructing a study-specific conceptual model, the scope of your model is likely to be limited. You are not defining the framework as it relates to the whole of the field of study in which you are participating. These concepts in a study-specific model are best represented as variables. Since we are talking about diagrams as a visual representation of the conceptual model, variables in diagrams are usually represented by a box. Inside the box you should print the name of the variable. To understand aspects and parts of a conceptual model, you need to understand a little about what these elements are and how they might be related. Therefore, we begin with these individual parts. The most basic elements in a conceptual model are variables and the arrows that connect them. What are variables? Variables are attributes of cases that can take on different values. I shall tell you more about how we classify variables based on the values they can have later. By way of an example, a simple variable is the color of an iris. Irises can, and do, have diverse colors. So, the attribute iris color can take on a number of values, for example, blue, green, brown, etc., etc. From now on I shall refer to this as eye color. Back to the type of variables. At the most basic level, there are three types of variables. Independent variables. These are variables that are changed. This can either be through manipulation, so the researcher makes the changes, or through measurement or observation of attributes of cases. If we stick with the example of eye color, the researcher would not make changes to the color of eyes, but would observe them. Although if you wanted to investigate the effect of eye color on the attractiveness of someone's appearance to a target group, you might use colored contact lenses to manipulate the apparent eye color. The advantage of this method would be that all other observable characteristics remain constant or controlled. I shall explain that in a minute. But first, dependent variables. These are variables that are dependent on the value of an independent variable. Let's stick with the eye color example. The dependent variable that we already have mentioned in this example about eye colors is attractiveness to a target group, or for simplicity I shall just use the word attractiveness. Controlled variables. These are the variables that remain the same, or a constant, among the cases that we study. They are controlled as they could influence the outcome. In our example, if we were to examine the attractiveness of eye color, this would normally, using many different persons, albeit with various eye colors, be difficult, as there could be many other attributes that would affect a particular person's attractiveness to a person in the target group. So, by utilizing colored contact lenses, but keeping the other attributes of a person constant, might allow us to study the effect of eye color on attractiveness. In a more general way, it is important to make sure that the cases you select in a study are not too different in respect of attributes that might also influence the dependent variable. You need to think carefully about this when designing your research. More generally, in social science research, we often cannot manipulate the independent variable due to ethical or practical considerations. However, we might measure some control variables and take these into account to infer relationships between the independent and dependent variables of interest. This is particularly so if they are possibly of impact on the dependent variable. By measuring them, we might come to know whether they have an effect. In the type of investigations you are doing in this program, an in-depth treatise of this goes beyond the scope of what you are expected to achieve. So, we shall leave this issue untouched, save that you should, to coin a cliché, always try to compare apples with apples, with the exception of the attribute you are investigating. There are two other types of variables that sometimes are important. From a practical point of view, it would be better to avoid these, as the analysis of their status is quite complex, and again, beyond the scope of your program. These are the moderator and mediator variables. Simply put, the mediator variable stands between the independent and the dependent variable. The moderator variable has an effect on the relationship between the independent and dependent variables. But, as I said, we shall not be going into these type of variables here. I hope that this explanation will help you in building simple conceptual models. It should consist of attributes of cases and the relationships between them. In this simple conceptual model shown here, you have 4 independent variables that are attributes, which have an effect on someone's satisfaction with their employment. These 4 attributes, or factors, are salary, relationship with the line manager, relationship with co-workers, time to travel to work. It is of course possible to think of many other factors that may play a role, but for the purpose of illustration we just stick with these 4. See how these 4 independent variables have arrows drawn towards the one dependent variable, namely, satisfaction with employment. In the next episode I shall show you how you connect your problem statement and the research questions with your conceptual model. If you subscribe to this channel, you'll find out when new videos are released and get to know about more good tips for conducting research, writing up your research in a thesis, management project, or consultancy project. The tips on Microsoft Word and other software are also good for any assignment that involves scholarly writing. See you later.